When a new pope recently ascended Peter's seat, I did a short video on why he picked the papal name Leo XIV. There was a lot of interest in that video, and so I thought, in keeping with my love of history in general and church history in particular, I would do a deeper study on the history of papal names. It also goes with the video, The Long Road to Reform, Episode 7, in my church history series on the Enduring Word YouTube channel. That will post in a few weeks. The episode there chronicles some of the popes of the 14th and 15th centuries whose corruption was one of the reasons why a reform of the church was inevitable. Okay, here we go. Nothing says I'm ready to lead 1 billion Catholics quite like spending your first day as Pope trying to figure out what you're going to call yourself. And before we get into the meat and potatoes, or maybe I should say the bread and the wine of this topic, let me paint you a picture. Imagine you've just been elected to the most visible religious position on earth. Cardinals are applauding, the Sistine Chapel is buzzing with excitement, and a cardinal approaches you with that time-honored question, "By what name do you wish to be called?" No pressure, but your answer will echo through history books, it will grace countless prayer cards, and quite possibly confuse Catholic school children for centuries to come. In the earliest days of the Bishop of Rome, the whole name change business wasn't a thing. The first several dozen Roman bishops simply kept their birth names. There was a Linus, a Cletus, an Anacletus. Those were names that sounded like neighbors in a Latin community, rather than the elevated leaders of a massive church in the capital of the Roman Empire. The tradition of taking a new name upon the election to the See of Rome likely began with John II in 533 AD, though historians love to debate that because, well, that's pretty much what historians do. They spend half of their career reading firsthand accounts of events in an attempt to get a picture of what happened, and the other half is spent discussing and debating with other historians what all that means. By the mid-6th century, the Roman bishop had achieved what we usually think of when we use the word pope. That is, the mostly undisputed leader of the Western Roman Catholic Church. Now, Eastern bishops didn't look to Rome as the headquarters of the church. That was Constantinople for them. So the Roman bishop, as influential as he may be, they did not regard as the leader of the entire church. John II's birth name was Mercurius, named after the Roman god Mercury. And since Pope Mercury just didn't sound like a good move, he took a new name that sounded, less pagan and more Christian. So how exactly does this process work? Well, it's not like there's some kind of papal name generator. The newly elected pope essentially had complete freedom to choose any name that he wanted, with a few unwritten rules and a healthy dose of tradition guiding the decision. Most popes chose names that honored previous popes that they admired, saints that they honored, or virtues they hoped to embody. It's essentially the ultimate in virtue signaling, but in the best possible way. When Pope Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio chose Francis in 2013, he wasn't just picking a name that sounded nice. He was making a statement about poverty, simplicity, and care for creation that would define his entire papacy. Plus, it had the added benefit of being the first time that anyone had used that name, which in papal circles is like being the first person in your high school to wear a particular brand of hip new athletic shoes. Some popes go for family significance. Others chose names that reflect their theological priorities or their hopes for their pontificate. And then there are those who, they seem to put about as much thought into it as choosing their lunch, which brings us to some of our most colorful examples. So let's start with the success stories. Pope John XXIII was born Angelo Giuseppe Roncalli. He chose his name to honor his predecessor, John XXII, though he probably didn't anticipate that he would become one of the most beloved popes in history. His warm, grandfatherly demeanor perfectly matched this simple, approachable name choice. When he opened the Second Vatican Council by saying that the church needed to open the windows and let in some fresh air, it was exactly the kind of thing that you would expect from someone who went by the name Good Pope John. Now, Pope John Paul II deserves special mention for what might be the most thoughtful papal name choice in history. Karol Wojtyła honored both his immediate predecessor, John Paul I, who had died after only 33 days in office, and the legacy that he represented. John Paul I had himself chosen a double name to honor both John the 23rd and Pope Paul VI, creating a beautiful chain of papal continuity. When Wojtyła took the name John Paul II, he was essentially saying, I'll carry on what they started. It was like the ecclesiastical equivalent of picking up someone else's drop torch and, running the rest of the race. Then there's Pope Gregory I. Now, of course, when he picked the name Gregory, since it was the first time that a Roman bishop had used that name, he wasn't called Gregory I. He was just Gregory, which means watchful. And he picked that name because he regarded his role as the leader of the church with great seriousness. He really owned his role as a pastor, a shepherd called to stand guard over God's flock. Gregory's impact on the church was so great that he's called Pope Gregory the Great. Now, that's some of the popes whose choice of name was what we'll call positive. Others, not so much. Like the Borgia Pope, Alexander VI. Born Rodrigo Borgia, he chose to honor Alexander the Great, which should have been everyone's first red flag. When your role model for papal leadership is a guy who conquered most of the known world before dying of either poison or excessive drinking at the age 32, perhaps you're missing the point of Christian leadership. Alexander VI went on to have multiple mistresses. He acknowledged several children, including the infamous Caesar and Lucretia, and generally treated the papacy like his personal kingdom. His name choice of Alexander turned out to be less great and more gross. Now, there have been 3 popes who picked the name Julius, as in Caesar, signaling their imperial ambitions. There have been 5 popes Sixtus, meaning sixth. Now, the first Sixtus was a bishop of Rome in the early 2nd century, so his wasn't a papal rename. He was likely the 6th child in the family and was nicknamed Sextus, which he carried into his role as bishop. The next 2 popes, Sextus, served before picking a new name became a papal routine. So there's a good chance that after Sixtus I, parents began to name their children Sixtus. Popes Sixtus IV and the Fifth took the name Sixtus to connect their pontificate to the earliest days of the Roman Church and the roots of the faith. And then we have the curious case of Pope Formosus, whose name literally means beautiful or handsome. While vanity might seem like a minor papal sin, Formosus managed to create one of the most bizarre episodes in church history. After his death, his successor, Pope Stephen VI, actually put Formosus' corpse on trial in what became known as the Cadaver Synod. They dressed up the decomposing pope, propped him up in a chair, and proceeded to convict him of various charges. His body was then thrown into the Tiber River. One has to wonder if choosing a humbler name might have helped him avoid posthumous humiliation. And we can't discuss infamous papal names without mentioning the John numbering controversy. We've had at least 21 popes named John, but the numbering is wonderfully confused thanks to medieval record keeping that makes your family photo labeling system look professional. Now, speaking of numbers, let's address the elephant in the room, papal numbering. This system, which seems straightforward, is actually a delightful mess that would make any database administrator weep. We've got gaps in the numbering. It turns out there never was a Pope John the 20th, and some popes were given the same number. The original Benedict X was later declared an antipope, making the next Pope 10 actually Pope 11. There were 3 Pope Johns between John the 14th and John the 19th, who either didn't exist or were antipopes, which means John the 20th was actually John the 22nd, and the famous John the 23rd was really John the 20th. But since there was already a John the 20th in the records, and correcting the paperwork would have been confusing, they just left the numbering intact. Speaking of John the 23rd, when Angelo Roncalli chose this name in 1958, There had already been a John the 23rd who'd been cast off as an antipope during the Western Schism of the 15th century. If a pope is declared an antipope, the Catholic Church doesn't recognize him. But Roncalli decided to use the number anyway, essentially saying, I'm taking this number back. It's like reclaiming a compromised email address, but with more theological implications. The most entertaining numbering issue has to be Pope Stephen. The official list shows Stephen II through Stephen IX, but there's an asterisk situation that would make any footnote enthusiast giddy. Stephen II died before his consecration, so some lists don't count him, creating a numbering discrepancy that persists to this day. Future popes named Stephen will have to decide whether they're following the official count or the practical count. It's like having two different anniversary dates with your spouse, except the entire Catholic Church is watching. Now, what fascinates me most about papal name choices is what they reveal about the men making them. Take Pope Pius, for instance. We've had 12 Popes Pius. Pious means dutiful or devout. It's the ecclesiastical equivalent of naming your child virtue or patience. You're setting some pretty high expectations, right out of the gate. Now, most of the Popes Pius lived up to their name, though Pope Pius IX holds the record for the longest papal reign and managed to pack enough controversy into his 31 years to keep church historians busy for centuries. And then there are the popes who chose names that reflected their theological priorities. Pope Urban II chose a name meaning of the city, which proved fitting since he spent much of his papacy dealing with urban politics and launching the First Crusade. Whether he intended the irony of promoting warfare while bearing a name associated with civilization is lost to history. But it certainly adds a layer of complexities to his legacy. Some papal name choices seem almost accidentally prophetic. Pope Innocent III, born Lotario de Segni, he chose a name meaning harmless or blameless, innocent. And then he proceeded to become one of the most powerful and politically active popes in history. He launched the Fourth Crusade, which ended up sacking Constantinople instead of Jerusalem. He established the Papal Inquisition and generally expanded papal power in ways that were decidedly not innocent. Either he had a remarkable sense of irony, or he genuinely believed that accumulating unprecedented papal authority was somehow harmless. In recent decades, papal name choices have become more predictable, but no less interesting. The last several popes have chosen names that honor beloved predecessors or signal their pastoral priorities. Papal name choices also reveal paths not taken. There's never been a Pope Peter because it's simply been deemed far too presumptuous. Some names that would seem obvious have been avoided for, various reasons. Despite having numerous saints named Joseph, we've never had a Pope Joseph. There's been plenty of Pauls, but no Matthews or Marks or Lukes. Behind every papal name change is a small army of Vatican bureaucrats updating everything from official documents to souvenir stands. Imagine being the person responsible for ordering new papal stationery. So, Holy Father, how do you want your name printed on the letterhead? Any particular font preference? Should we go with the traditional gold leaf, or are you more minimalist? The practical implications of papal naming extend beyond paperwork. Within hours of a pope's election and name announcement, manufacturers worldwide are producing commemorative plates and prayer cards, bobbleheads, papal bobbleheads. The Vatican gift shop doesn't run itself, after all. As we wrap up our journey through the wonderfully weird world of papal nomenclature, I think it's worth remembering that these name choices, however quirky or controversial, represent moments of profound personal reflection. Each newly elected pope faces the weight of nearly 2 millennia of Christian history and must somehow encapsulate his hopes and fears and vision for the church in a single name choice. Whether they choose wisely, like John the 23rd, or poorly, like Alexander VI, these names become part of the grand narrative of Christianity. They remind us that behind all the pomp, ceremony, and institutional authority, the papacy has always been occupied by human beings making very human decisions, sometimes inspired, sometimes misguided, but always consequential. So the next time you hear about a new pope's name choice, remember that you're witnessing not just an ecclesiastical tradition, but a moment when one person's hopes for the church become enshrined in history.